Flight attendant kicks black female billionaire off plane. 7 minutes later, she owns the airline. A routine flight takes an unexpected turn when Beth Anderson, a billionaire disguised in simplicity, is humiliated by a flight attendant's snap judgment. What begins as a quiet act of bias spirals into a powerful reckoning, shaking the airline industry and changing lives forever. How will one woman's resolve transform injustice into redemption and inspire a movement for equality? Let's stick around to find out. But before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from today. If you enjoy this tale, don't forget to subscribe. Beth Anderson adjusted the strap of her well-worn leather handbag as she made her way through the bustling terminal of Los Angeles International Airport. At 65, she moved with a calm assurance, a woman who had navigated countless challenges and emerged stronger each time. Her silver-streaked hair was tied in a loose bun, and her simple cardigan and slacks made her blend seamlessly into the crowd. Few would guess that she was a billionaire, a titan of industry who sat on the boards of several Fortune 500 companies and wielded influence in sectors ranging from tech to real estate. Beth preferred it this way. She had long abandoned the trappings of wealth for a quieter, more understated presence. Her wealth spoke for itself in boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations. She didn't need it to announce itself in public. As she approached the gate for her flight to New York, she smiled warmly at the gate agent, handed over her ticket, and made her way down the jet bridge. It was a red-eye flight, and the first-class cabin was quiet, with most passengers already seated. Beth found her seat, 1A, a cozy window spot, and settled in, pulling a book from her bag. Not far behind her, Sarah Mitchell entered the first-class cabin, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Sarah, a flight attendant in her early 30s, prided herself on maintaining a pristine cabin and catering to an elite clientele. With her sharp uniform and practiced smile, she radiated professionalism, at least outwardly. Privately, Sarah harbored certain assumptions about who belonged in first class, shaped by years of serving a very particular demographic. When she noticed Beth, Sarah's smile faltered slightly. The older woman's plain attire stood out among the designer suits and handbags of the other passengers. Sarah's gaze flicked to Beth's seat, then to her demeanor, and suspicion began to creep in. She doesn't look like someone who'd fly first class, Sarah thought. Approaching Beth, Sarah offered a tight smile. "Excuse me, ma'am. May I see your boarding pass?" Beth looked up from her book, her expression calm but curious. "Of course." She handed over the small slip of paper without hesitation. Sarah examined it closely, her eyes narrowing. The ticket clearly stated 1A, but Sarah's assumptions wouldn't let her rest. "I see you're in 1A, Sarah said slowly. "Are you sure you didn't accidentally board the wrong cabin?" Beth raised an eyebrow, her calm composure unshaken. "I'm quite certain. This is my seat." The exchange caught the attention of a few nearby passengers, who glanced over with mild curiosity. Sarah's voice grew firmer. "It's just that we occasionally have mix-ups with seating. Let me double-check with the gate agent." Beth nodded, her tone patient. "Take your time." Sarah returned a few minutes later, her expression tight. She had confirmed that Beth's ticket was legitimate, but her own doubts hadn't subsided. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said briskly, "but we're going to need you to move to the main cabin. There must have been an error when your ticket was issued." Beth tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "An error?" "Yes," Sarah said, her voice firm. "You'll be more comfortable in the main cabin. Let me help you find a seat." The murmurs among the other passengers grew louder, but Beth didn't protest. She stood gracefully, gathering her belongings without a word. "If that's what needs to be done," she said simply, her tone neutral. As she followed Sarah toward the economy cabin, Beth's mind was already racing. She had dealt with worse indignities in her long career. Condescending investors, dismissive board members. But this was different. Sarah's tone, her insistence, and her refusal to accept the truth of the ticket all pointed to one thing: bias. Beth took her assigned seat in the economy cabin, tucking her bag beneath the seat in front of her. Around her, the hum of chatter and the rustle of bags filled the air. She leaned back and closed her eyes, her outward calm masking the flurry of calculations taking place in her mind. Sarah, meanwhile, returned to the first-class cabin, her posture stiff with self-satisfaction. Order restored, she thought to herself, unaware that her actions had set something far larger in motion. She moved through the cabin with a renewed sense of authority, pouring drinks and greeting passengers with an air of practiced charm. As the plane began its ascent, Beth opened her phone and typed a brief message to her assistant. Please schedule a call with the board first thing tomorrow. I want a full report on the training policies for all flight staff. This needs immediate attention. Beth's fingers hovered over the screen before adding, also, remind me to review our equity initiatives. It seems we have work to do. Satisfied, she put her phone away and returned to her book, her mind now focused on the larger picture. She had no intention of letting the incident slide, but she also knew that change required strategy, not anger. This wasn't just about her seat. It was about every assumption, every snap judgment, and every moment of quiet bias that went unchecked. Beth Anderson was many things: a billionaire, a leader, a trailblazer. But above all, she was a force of quiet resolve. And Sarah Mitchell, for all her self-assurance, was about to learn that Beth's silence was far more powerful than any confrontation. Beth Anderson settled into her economy-class seat with the same calm dignity that had carried her through countless boardroom battles. The hum of the plane's engines masked the low chatter around her as passengers adjusted their belongings and settled in for the flight. Beth opened her phone, scrolling through emails with a practiced efficiency that betrayed no trace of irritation. She sent a message to her assistant, Miranda, with precise instructions. Miranda, we need to address a matter with the airline immediately. Schedule a call with the CEO as soon as possible tomorrow. Also, pull the training and equity compliance reports for the flight staff. Let's make sure this situation is handled properly. She hit send, leaned back, and calmly closed her eyes. Externally, she was the picture of serenity, but Beth's mind was calculating. The wheels of change had already begun to turn. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. Excuse me, ma'am. Are you comfortable? Can I get you anything? Beth opened her eyes to see Emily Parker, a young flight attendant with kind eyes and an apologetic demeanor. Unlike her colleague, Emily's tone was warm and genuine. I'm fine, thank you, Beth replied, her voice even, but I appreciate you checking in. Emily hesitated, glancing at Beth's bag tucked beneath the seat. If there's anything you need, please don't hesitate to ask. I noticed what happened earlier. I'm sorry about that. Beth studied her for a moment, sensing the sincerity behind her words. Thank you, she said, her tone softening. It's refreshing to meet someone who cares about how their actions affect others. Emily nodded, a flicker of discomfort crossing her face. She had seen Sarah's behavior and disagreed with it, but hadn't felt empowered to intervene. I'll make sure you're taken care of for the rest of the flight, Emily added before retreating to assist other passengers. Beth watched her go, thinking of the countless young professionals like Emily who worked hard in environments shaped by people like Sarah. Change, Beth realized, wasn't just about addressing blatant bias. It was about creating systems that empowered the right people to thrive. Meanwhile, back in the first-class cabin, Sarah Mitchell moved with a newfound confidence. She poured glasses of champagne for the passengers and responded to requests with the polished charm she had honed over years in the service industry. In her mind, Sarah felt justified in her earlier actions. Rules are rules, she thought. First class isn't just about a seat. It's about maintaining an image. She took pride in upholding the high standards of her cabin, unaware that her decision had set off a chain of events she couldn't control. Halfway through the flight, Beth's assistant Miranda called, using a secure line that Beth always kept available. Beth answered quietly, her tone steady but authoritative. Miranda, give me an update. Miranda's voice was crisp. I've scheduled a call with the CEO for 9 a.m. tomorrow. Also, you're still listed as the second largest private shareholder in the airline. I thought that might be relevant. Beth's lips curved into a faint smile. Oh, it's very relevant. Thank you, Miranda. Do you want me to contact the airline's board directly? Miranda asked. Not yet, Beth replied. Let's handle this with precision. but prepare a brief on their equity and training initiatives. I want a clear picture of where they're falling short." Beth ended the call and returned her phone to her back. She glanced around the economy cabin, noting the cramped seats and tired faces. Her thoughts turned to the systems she had helped build, systems that could elevate or exclude, depending on how they were managed. This airline, she realized, was no exception. As the flight neared its descent, Sarah was wiping down the galley counter when the phone at her station rang. She picked it up, her expression curious. "This is Sarah Mitchell," she said brightly. The voice on the other end was curt and formal. "Ms. Mitchell, this is Jacob Fry from the airline's executive office. We've received a report about an incident on your flight." Sarah's smile faltered. "A report?" "Yes," Jacob replied. "It concerns your treatment of one of our first-class passengers, Mrs. Beth Anderson." The name sent a jolt of recognition through Sarah, but she tried to maintain her composure. "I'm not sure what you mean. There was a seating issue, but it was resolved." Jacob's tone sharpened. "Mrs. Anderson is a significant shareholder in our company, Ms. Mitchell. She has requested a formal review of today's incident, and it's being escalated to the board. We'll need you to provide a full account of your actions as soon as you land." Sarah's hand tightened around the phone. Her mind raced, replaying every moment of the interaction. The calm authority in Jacob's voice made it clear. She had underestimated the woman in seat 1A. I understand," Sarah stammered, her earlier confidence crumbling. As the plane touched down, Beth remained seated, watching the flurry of activity as passengers prepared to disembark. She felt Emily's presence before she turned, the young flight attendant standing nearby with a polite smile. "Mrs. Anderson, I wanted to thank you for your patience," Emily said softly. "I hope the rest of your journey goes smoothly." Beth gave her a warm smile. "You've been a bright spot on this flight, Emily. Thank you for your kindness." As Beth rose to leave, she caught a glimpse of Sarah standing near the galley, her face pale and her posture tense. Their eyes met briefly, but Beth offered no expression of anger or triumph. Instead, she turned and walked off the plane, her mind focused on the work ahead. For Beth Anderson, justice wasn't about humiliation or revenge. It was about creating systems that demanded accountability and empowered those who deserved recognition. And Sarah Mitchell, whether she realized it or not, was about to learn the true power of silence. As the plane taxied to the gate, the usual commotion of passengers preparing to disembark filled the cabin. Overhead compartments clicked open, carry-ons were pulled down, and murmured conversations echoed in the narrow aisles. Sarah Mitchell stood stiffly near the galley, her polished facade barely masking her growing unease. The phone call from the executive office weighed heavily on her, and her thoughts churned with anxiety. When the seatbelt sign turned off, Sarah noticed two uniformed security personnel boarding the plane, their serious expressions scanning the cabin. She straightened, instinctively adjusting her uniform. Surely, they're here for something unrelated, she thought, clinging to a thread of hope. "MS. Sarah Mitchell?" one of the officers asked, his tone polite but firm. Sarah's heart sank. "Yes, that's me," she replied, her voice wavering slightly. "We need you to come with us," the officer said. "There's a situation that requires your attention." Passengers nearby exchanged curious glances as Sarah followed the officers off the plane, her posture stiff and her cheeks flushed. Whispers of speculation filled the air, rippling through the rows like a wave. In a sleek conference room at the airline's headquarters, members of the board of directors gathered in person and via video call. The atmosphere was tense, with murmured discussions punctuated by the occasional sharp exchange. Beth Anderson sat at the head of the table, her calm demeanor commanding attention. The CEO, Robert Carver, entered the room hurriedly, clutching a tablet loaded with reports. "Mrs. Anderson," he began, nodding respectfully, "thank you for agreeing to meet on such short notice." Beth gestured for him to sit. "Robert, I appreciate your promptness. Let's not waste time. We're here because your staff mishandled a situation that speaks to deeper issues within this company." Carver cleared his throat, glancing at the other board members. "I've reviewed the initial report. The flight attendant, Sarah Mitchell, appears to have acted on incorrect assumptions about your status as a passenger. We're already conducting an internal investigation. Beth leaned forward slightly, her voice steady but sharp. This is not just about me. This is about a culture that allows these assumptions to go unchecked. As a shareholder, I've been watching this company grow, and while its financial performance has been admirable, its policies on equity and diversity are falling behind. This incident is proof. One board member, an older man with salt and pepper hair, interjected. Beth, do you think this warrants a full-scale review? It seems like an isolated incident. Beth's gaze locked onto his, her tone unwavering. It's only isolated if you're not paying attention. How many other passengers have faced similar treatment without the resources or platform to speak out? This airline's reputation is at stake, and if we don't address this, the fallout will be far worse than one news cycle. Meanwhile, in a quiet office at the airport, Sarah sat across from a stern-faced HR representative. Her stomach churned as the woman read aloud from a prepared statement. Ms. Mitchell, due to the events of Flight 573, you are being placed on indefinite suspension while the investigation is underway. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties and prohibited from accessing any airline property. Sarah's voice cracked as she protested. It was a misunderstanding. I thought I was upholding the rules. The HR representative's expression didn't waver. Mrs. Anderson is a major shareholder in this company, and her complaint has brought significant attention to our policies, or lack thereof. The board is taking this very seriously. Sarah slumped in her chair, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had always taken pride in her work, but now her career seemed to be slipping through her fingers. Her mind raced, not with remorse but with panic. How did it come to this? Within hours, the story hit the news. Headlines splashed across websites and television screens. Airline shareholder calls for reform after discriminatory incident. Flight attendant suspended amid allegations of bias against Billionaire. Beth Anderson pushes equity initiative following first-class controversy. Social media exploded with opinions. Hashtags like hashtag accountability in airlines and hashtag Beth Anderson speaks out, trending worldwide. Supporters praised Beth's calm handling of the situation and called for systemic change, while others criticized the airline for failing to address such issues earlier. Clips of Beth leaving the plane circulated online, her composed demeanor drawing admiration. In contrast, blurry photos of Sarah being escorted by security fueled outrage, with many labeling her actions as emblematic of deeper problems in customer service and workplace training. Back at the board meeting, Beth laid out her vision for the company's future. We need a comprehensive overhaul of our training programs, she said. Implicit bias training should be mandatory for all employees, from the top down. Additionally, I'm proposing a new customer relations initiative that prioritizes empathy and accountability. Carver nodded, taking notes. We'll also need to address this publicly. The media isn't letting this go. Beth's tone softened slightly. Good. Let them hold us accountable. This isn't about protecting reputations. It's about earning trust. The board unanimously approved Beth's proposals, and within days, the airline announced sweeping changes to its policies. Press releases highlighted Beth's leadership, positioning her as a catalyst for progress within the company. As news of the reforms spread, the public response was overwhelmingly positive. Passengers shared their own stories of bias and mistreatment, sparking a broader conversation about the airline industry's shortcomings. Beth's name became synonymous with integrity and change, and many praised her for using her influence to advocate for others. For Sarah, the fallout was swift and unforgiving. Her suspension turned into termination, and she was placed on an industry-wide watch list, effectively blacklisting her from most major airlines. Friends and colleagues distanced themselves, fearing association with the controversy. Sarah avoided the news but couldn't escape the pervasive sense of isolation and regret. I never thought it would go this far, she admitted to herself, though the lingering bitterness made it difficult to fully accept her role in the debacle. Amid the chaos, Beth focused on the larger picture. She had no desire to see Sarah destroyed, but she understood that accountability was necessary for real change. Her focus remained on improving the airline and ensuring that incidents like this became relics of the past. As she prepared for a press conference announcing the new reforms, Beth reflected on the journey so far. It's never just about one person, she thought. It's about the systems we create and the people we empower to uphold them. For Beth Anderson, the fall of one flight attendant was not the goal. The rise of a more equitable and compassionate industry was. The sterile walls of the hearing room amplified the tension as Sarah Mitchell sat at the center of a long table. Facing her were members of the airline's internal review board, their expressions somber and impassive. A single microphone sat before Sarah, its presence both an invitation and a demand for accountability. Sarah's palms were clammy, her mind racing with what she could possibly say to salvage her career. She had been summoned to provide an explanation for her actions on Flight 573 and defend her conduct in the face of mounting criticism. The incident had spiraled far beyond her control, dominating headlines and social media discussions for weeks. A senior investigator began the proceedings. "Ms. Mitchell, do you understand the gravity of the allegations against you?" "Yes," Sarah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your actions were not only unprofessional, but have brought significant reputational harm to this airline. This hearing is your opportunity to address the board directly before a final decision is made." Sarah swallowed hard. "I made a mistake," she began, her voice trembling. "I acted based on assumptions, and I realize now how wrong I was. But it was never my intention to harm or discriminate against anyone." The board members exchanged glances, unimpressed by her defense. Another member leaned forward, his voice firm. "Intention does not negate impact, Ms. Mitchell. Your behavior reflects a deeper issue within our organization, one we can no longer ignore." The decision was swift and uncompromising. Sarah's contract was officially terminated, and her name was added to an industry-wide blacklist, effectively barring her from future employment with most major airlines. The review board issued a statement to the press shortly after. "Our company has zero tolerance for discrimination or bias in any form. We are implementing mandatory bias and equity training for all staff, and have made changes to our policies to ensure that every passenger is treated with dignity and respect." The announcement was met with widespread approval. Activists and passengers alike praised the airline for taking decisive action, though some debated whether Sarah's punishment was too harsh. Regardless, the company's strong stance sent a clear message. Accountability was non-negotiable. Amid the fallout, Beth Anderson moved forward with her vision for systemic change. She announced the creation of a new initiative, the Equity in Service Foundation, aimed at addressing discrimination within the service industry. The foundation would focus on training programs, scholarship opportunities, and research into unconscious bias, all designed to create a more equitable environment for both employees and customers. "Our experiences in service define how we see one another," Beth said during the foundation's launch event. "By addressing the biases that shape these interactions, we can build a society where everyone is treated with the respect they deserve." The foundation garnered significant support from other industry leaders and philanthropists. Donations poured in, and partnerships with universities and advocacy groups helped establish the foundation as a force for change. Beth also took a personal interest in the foundation's operations, ensuring that its programs were impactful and far-reaching. For her, this wasn't just about reforming one airline. It was about creating a ripple effect that would transform the entire industry. While Sarah faced the consequences of her actions, another name emerged in the spotlight: Emily Parker. The young flight attendant who had shown empathy and professionalism during the incident was praised in internal reports and customer feedback alike. Her calm and considerate approach to Beth had stood in stark contrast to Sarah's behavior, highlighting the importance of compassion in service roles. Beth personally recommended Emily for a promotion, citing her as an example of the values the airline should prioritize. Within weeks, Emily was promoted to a leadership role in the airline's customer service department, where she was tasked with overseeing staff training and implementing the new equity initiatives. At a small ceremony honoring her promotion, Beth spoke directly to Emily. "Your kindness reminded me of what service should be about. It's people like you who will lead the way toward a better future." Emily, humbled by the recognition, vowed to live up to the responsibility. "Thank you, Mrs. Anderson. I'll do my best to make sure no one else feels the way you did that day." Back in her small apartment, Sarah watched the news coverage of Beth's foundation launch and Emily's promotion with a heavy heart. The world she had once navigated with confidence now felt distant and unreachable. Her career in aviation was over, and she faced the daunting prospect of starting anew. For the first time, Sarah allowed herself to reflect deeply on her actions. The humiliation, the isolation, the loss. These were the consequences of a moment of bias she hadn't thought twice about. But more than that, they were a reminder of how deeply those biases were ingrained. She began writing a letter. Not to the airline or the board, but to Beth. It wasn't an appeal for forgiveness. It was an acknowledgement of her wrongs and a genuine expression of regret. Beth's actions had sparked a wave of reform across the industry. Other airlines began adopting similar policies, inspired by the incident and the foundation's work. Bias training became a standard part of onboarding, and the service industry as a whole began reevaluating its practices. For Beth, the journey was far from over. She continued to push for progress, knowing that true change required persistence and collaboration. Emily became a trusted partner in the effort, her role as a champion of equity growing with each passing day. As the Equity in Service Foundation gained momentum, it became a symbol of what was possible when one incident was met with action rather than silence. And for Beth, it was proof that even the quietest storm could leave a lasting impact. Weeks after her termination, Sarah Mitchell sat at her kitchen table, staring at a blank sheet of paper. She had spent countless sleepless nights replaying the events on Flight 573, the phone call from the executive office, and her subsequent fall from grace. Her pride had kept her from fully admitting the depth of her mistakes, but now, faced with the silence of a life upended, she knew she couldn't move forward without addressing her actions. She picked up her pen and began to write, her words raw and unfiltered. Dear Mrs. Anderson, I am writing to you not to ask for forgiveness, but to acknowledge the harm I caused. My actions on Flight 573 were not only unprofessional but deeply rooted in biases I hadn't confronted in myself. I acted out of ignorance and arrogance, and I understand now how damaging that was, not just to you, but to everyone watching. Your composure and grace in the face of my behavior taught me more than I can express. I have spent the past weeks reflecting on who I am and who I want to be, and I realize that change begins with accountability. I know I cannot undo the harm I've caused, but I hope to learn from it and become better. Thank you for showing me what true leadership looks like. Sincerely, Sarah Mitchell. Sarah folded the letter and sealed it in an envelope. Sending it was a small step, but it felt monumental. She wasn't expecting a response, but for the first time in weeks, she felt a sliver of hope. Beth Anderson read Sarah's letter in her office, the sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She had received countless messages in the aftermath of the incident, letters of support, pleas for assistance, and even a few apologies. But Sarah's letter stood out for its sincerity and humility. Beth believed in second chances. Her own journey to success had been filled with moments where others had extended grace to her, and she knew the power of redemption when approached with genuine intent. She picked up her phone and called Miranda. "Schedule a meeting with Sarah Mitchell," she said. "I want to speak with her personally." A week later, Sarah found herself nervously entering the offices of the Equity in Service Foundation. She was greeted by Miranda, who led her to Beth's private office. Beth stood as Sarah entered, her presence both commanding and approachable. "Ms. Mitchell," Beth said warmly, gesturing to a chair. "Thank you for coming." Sarah sat down, clutching her purse tightly. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Mrs. Anderson. I didn't expect this." Beth nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I received your letter, and I can see that you've taken time to reflect. Mistakes are inevitable, but what matters is how we respond to them. So, tell me, what have you learned?" Sarah took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I've learned that bias isn't always loud. It can be quiet, subtle, and dangerous. I see now how my assumptions hurt not only you but also my colleagues, and how they could have perpetuated harm in ways I never realized." Beth listened intently, then leaned forward slightly. "What do you want to do with this understanding?" Sarah hesitated, then said, "I want to be part of the solution. I know I don't deserve it, but if there's any way I can help your foundation, I'd like to contribute." Beth studied her for a moment, then smiled. "Very well. We can always use someone willing to do the hard work of learning and unlearning. Welcome to the foundation, Ms. Mitchell. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as relief washed over her. Thank you, Mrs. Anderson. I won't let you down. Beth's decision to bring Sarah on board became a story in itself, illustrating the foundation's commitment to growth and transformation. Sarah worked tirelessly, assisting with outreach programs and sharing her experience as a cautionary tale in training workshops. The ripple effect of Beth's actions extended far beyond the airline. Other carriers adopted policies modeled after the Foundation's recommendations, implementing bias training and improving diversity in their hiring practices. The industry began to shift, one policy at a time. Meanwhile, Emily Parker's career continued to flourish. Recognized for her professionalism and empathy, she was named an ambassador for the Equity in Service campaign, traveling across the country to advocate for fairness in customer service industries. Her story became an example of how small acts of kindness could lead to monumental change. At an event celebrating the campaign's milestones, Emily took the stage and addressed the audience. This isn't just about fixing mistakes, it's about building a culture where mistakes like these don't happen in the first place. We can all play a part in creating that change. As the foundation celebrated its first anniversary, Beth, Sarah, and Emily found themselves standing side by side at a gala event. The room was filled with supporters, partners, and beneficiaries of the foundation's work. Beth looked around, her heart swelling with pride at what they had accomplished. In her closing speech, Beth said, "This journey has shown me that change doesn't happen in isolation. It takes courage, humility, and a shared commitment to a better future. Together, we can turn moments of failure into opportunities for growth and build a world where everyone has a seat at the table." The applause was thunderous, but for Beth, the real reward was the connections she had forged and the lives that had been transformed. As she stepped off the stage, she caught Sarah's eye and gave her a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of how far they had come. For Sarah, Emily, and countless others, the journey was just beginning. But for the first time, the road ahead felt bright, paved with hope, justice, and the promise of meaningful change.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so we can keep bringing you the best stories.